Drink beer, it's good for you. I'm empty-handed and I'm feeling blue, and I'm gonna drink till the day that I die.
Hello and welcome to the video. This is actually the first video in a proposed new series of mine, Beer Brewing Questions and Answers. The idea behind this is quite simple. I get asked a great deal of different questions on brewing every day, many of which are within Facebook Messenger. Some of them are totally relevant to the grain father and how to get the best from it, and I look to address those types of questions not only by answering at the time but also producing video content like the Grainfather's Hints and Tips collection series, for example. But a lot of the questions I get are also general brewing questions, and these questions cover both basic and more advanced topics. This new video series will serve to share the more interesting things that come up and also things that are commonly asked, so hopefully there should be something for everyone, no matter how experienced or inexperienced you are. So let's get started. So here's a couple of examples of questions that I get to do with bitterness in beer. My beer's bitterness seems more than the last time I brewed it, but my recipe is unchanged. Why? Another variation that I hear a lot is, why does this beer taste less bitter than the recipe suggested via the IBU score? Okay, so let's talk about IBU in homebrew. Firstly, the hops we are using have an alpha acid percentage figure on the packages that they are contained in. Using brewing software, we can calculate how much of a hop to use to give our beer the IBU we want. Or can we? The thing to understand here is that there are actually many variables at work. Firstly, the alpha acid can vary from the figure written on your packet. Hop pellets can also vary in terms of how much vegetable matter they contain, which can lead to more of a tannin effect to the end taste, which can totally skew the effect. There is also the factor that if you are not brewing in a fully temperature and humidity controlled environment, then this can change the effect of boiling your hops and thus the end result. The velocity of your boil simply varies. There are also the factors of the wort chemistry itself, with things like protein levels that are suspected to also have a direct effect on IBU, not only the IBU rating, but also the perceived IBU too. Tests have actually shown that if you are within 10% of your target IBU in a homebrew situation, then you have actually nailed down things very well. A 30% plus variation is actually far more likely in actual fact. To me, this is actually one of the great things about homebrewing. You do get this variation that I find very, very acceptable. If you want to nail down repeatability as much as possible at home without spending huge amounts of money, then there are steps you can take, including keeping your brewing techniques and environment consistent. This next question is also a popular one, and it is somewhat related to the previous two questions that I've just addressed. The question asks, why is it that my starting gravity and final gravity can vary from what the recipe said? Again, there are a lot of variables involved in this. Firstly, from the point of view of fermentables, the sugar that can be extracted is merely a prediction. For example, your recipe could say to use pale ale malt as the base of the recipe. Pale ale malt can and will vary from malthouse to malthouse, and within the same malthouse's batches of grain even. There is also a question of what efficiency you achieve within your mash compared to the efficiency figure used to base the recipe on. All the recipes that I share clearly state that they assume an efficiency of 75%. But if you always get closer to 80%, for example, then you should make your own adjustments to allow for this variation. So we have now pretty much covered the starting gravity side of things. When it comes to final gravity, one large factor is the yeast. Again, the attenuation rate, or in layman's terms the amount of sugar that the yeast will eat as a percentage, is merely an estimate. It can and will vary. Another thing to consider is that if you're using a recipe and yet you're using a different type of yeast, then this also should be accounted for in the use of brewing software or on one of the online calculators that you can use for free. So to summarize, when you use any given recipe, you should dial it in to suit your brewing as much as possible to achieve as much control as possible. But as previously stated, there is always going to be variation within a homebrew environment. Okay, so on to the next question. I bottled my beer after 14 days, just like I always have, but now when I open one, it almost hits my ceiling. Firstly, you must always use a hydrometer to check your beer before bottling it. Time is not the most important factor when it comes to yeast. It is vital to check your gravity levels before making the decision to bottle a beer. Simply seeing after 14 days that your beer has hit the predicted final gravity on day 14 is certainly not enough either. You need to see that the gravity has not changed for 3 days before making the judgment call to know that it is finished and safe to bottle. Every beer that shows overcarbonation can be the direct result of a beer that simply was not finished with its fermentation. Another factor that can also come in is wild yeast. This is often characterized by having very small, tightly packed bubbles. Getting your wort down to yeast pitching temperatures as quickly as possible is key, as well as properly aerating your wort so that your chosen yeast can take control before a wild yeast one can. In either circumstance, the very least of your worries is a bottle that shows too much carbonation. What is of real concern is that there is too much sugar left to eat that causes your bottles to become so overpressurized that they explode. So that's all we have time for within this first episode. I do hope that you all found it interesting and useful. Please let me know. So if you did like this video, then please do like it on YouTube. This really helps me out and allows the videos to be seen by a wider audience on YouTube. I have always got a lot of new videos planned for the future, so if you are interested in seeing my new content, then please subscribe for future content. If you have any questions on anything that I have covered in this video or any other video, then please do not hesitate to get in touch with me via YouTube or Facebook. I'm a member of pretty much every Grainfather Facebook group and more. Happy brewing!